You got it. Hold it, man. These guys don't understand. Hey, these guys have got enough fucked up. It's all confused in their minds. Stop. Let's stop playing here. Wait a minute. Stop. Stop. These guys don't understand it. They're missing the geometrical thing that we're trying to do here.
Last 4 calls, go back. The one before the last one, don't. I want the last 3. Go back 4. We got to do news, which kind of rules through, and we'll talk to you a little bit afterwards. Get to the other questions, maybe. Then we'll play. We will play heroin, and then I'll who your ass is out the door. I'll use you like Jeffrey Lee did for years, and then discard you. This is Indy 1031. My name's Dickie Barrett. Ward Dodson and Terry Graham, members of the Gun Club. So, listen, first question is, what was Jeffrey Lee Pierce like?
There were many years in a row where I just had this recurring dream of, just hitting him in the face with a golf club repeatedly. Jeffrey, let's see, he was a tortured, evil genius.
We're using an 8-iron or 9 because I was actually thinking of a wedge would be the instrument that would deliver the most damage.
Sounds like you guys could write a book, right?
Well, it just so happens that I am writing a book. The guy was insane, and there's nothing. It happened exactly the way it was supposed to. If you were allowed to slug him once a day in the neck, then you could say, "Oh, okay, that was worth it." Like a kung fu right to the larynx. The thing that's unfortunate is he had a really good band, and he let it slip away from him.
Well, the first show I ever did with him, he came out in like a white Colonel Sanders outfit with a little bolo tie.
Right.
He had a huge Bible under his arm. He slammed the Bible down on the stage and then took this chain and started beating on the Bible. And I thought, well, I like this. This is pretty good. I'm from Texas, so I can appreciate this. He was the star of the show, and we all just jumped on and off. It was Jeff's musical misery tour. It's frustrating, I think, to us because we would have probably ridden it a lot farther with him if he would have just allowed it.
Could you appreciate the magic and the genius part of him as well?
Lyrically, he was like on par with the greats. I mean,
Would you call him a good singer?
No. He sang in the key of Jeff, and he had bad time, and he wasn't the sexiest looking Jeff.
My kind of front man.
He definitely was fearless, and he tried to get a reaction out of the audience.
We'd walk off stage and look at each other and go, how much longer can we do this?
In Houston, for instance, we were pelted with beer cans before we even started the first song.
You put in this work and you think like this is a good deal, and then you go out and show everybody what you got, and they're like, hey, fuck off, get out of here.
And we almost didn't get out of the club alive.
You're lame, you know, we're gonna kill you if you don't get out of here.
They were bumping our van with their pickups. Two guys were doing that after the show. So, you know, it was a close call.
You know, I remember telling Jeffrey, like, can you not incense the crowd when it starts going south? And it was just, you know, no, fuck you. We're doing it this way. You know, he was a tough guy to be around, but
Right.
25 years later, here we are.
It feels like we were never here at all.
We were all just standing there, and Jeff was just really thought he was fucking Elvis, and that, you know,
Elvis. Yeah.
or whatever. I mean, he really thought, he just believed so adamantly. Like, just talk about a relentless self-promoter.
But think
you know?
about it. What good does it do you to be in Hollywood if you don't believe your own
Absolutely.
bullshit?
I would have to give some credit to his family. I mean, they were all. It's the weirdest thing. They thought he was like Elvis too. They treated him like
Yes,
he was
yes,
Elvis.
they did.
Okay.
Believe your myth, or
And I don't like for
Fuck.
my child to keep in the streets like a hog, a dog. Lying on God. And they beat
that was our
lying
first
on us.
manager. She's since.
In the streets. You know what the president did? And how many spiders can you take in your apartment?
She has a lot of problems with sweaters in her apartment.
Just
yeah.
stand there.
For doing this, you're gonna give us a couple of hot dogs, right?
I mean, I knew Jeffrey was nuts almost immediately. These super sweet people would let us stay at their places, and he would get thrown out of each place. Like, well, take bets. So these, you know, last 3 days, 7 days, 10 days. You know, he's just incorrigible. You know, making $700 phone calls to Europe and just all kinds of crazy shit. But yeah, he just started acting more insane.
Jeffrey was definitely independent, on his own, do-it-yourself kind of person.
He had a stubbornness and a willfulness that was, you know, Jeffrey's way. Jeff and I met in drama class, which is the magnet for outsiders. We both felt like nobody understood us but the couple of other friends that we had in drama class. Jeff was a huge Brando fan. So we would go sneak off to Hollywood to the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute because Brando went there and James Dean went there. And we started reading plays. Jeff loved Panther, I remember.
He's coming from some kind of nerdy kid locked up in his room with a bunch of cool books. You know, this guy read. You could tell he was literate. You know, he looked at maps. He read Conrad. You know, he was an interesting guy.
He had aspirations of being this great literary writer.
He would read a lot, and he turned me on to Malcolm Lowry, Under the Volcano. He was really into that. He would give me books. He over at his place he had bags and bags of books, and he was just reading. You know, he would read. He was crazy about William Burroughs, and he was crazy about William Kennedy.
He really felt he was onto something that nobody else was talking to by reading this stuff. We didn't get this stuff in school. But I think he felt he had struck a vein, that he was in the milieu of, you know, creativity, whether it was this great jazz, this great, you know, literature.
You know, when Jeffrey and I were hanging out, almost always it was either going to clubs to see music or we're going to record stores. You know, we did a lot of going through South Central LA and the San Fernando Valley, just looking for records.
We'd go to the beach. Well, a day at the beach with Jeff is nowhere near the beach. We would hit every thrift store between like Venice and Redondo, and we'd go to these record shops in Manhattan Beach, and we would come back with like a leather jacket, a couple of books, and some really great 45s, and never having seen the beach.
We called them record cruises. You know, just go looking for old blues records or 78s.
I'd have to practically scream at him, hey, the sun is setting, can't we at least look at the ocean? And, you know, you have to scream at him to really, before he felt like you really meant it. And we'd stop and look at the sunset and then get back in the car so we can hear our records and try our jackets on.
He had like a white vinyl trench coat. Maybe it was vinyl, but it was a white trench coat, like belted very tightly. A big Deborah Harry badge and a white cowboy, like I think they were even girls, 80s, you know, 70s cowboy boots. And I thought, this guy is really, really nuts.
He was always wearing like striped French sailor shirts or like polka dotted tab collar shirts. He was really mod.
He was just a, you know, baby face, nerdy guy. And he dressed funny. He wore saddle shoes. He wore makeup.
You didn't look at him and go like, wow, look at that freak. It was more like, what's going on inside this guy?
He had a very peculiar fashion sense. He would always talk about Marilyn Monroe during the 7-year itch period.
I think especially with the lipstick and the sort of strange male attempt to look like Marilyn Monroe, kind of an homage and tribute to his fascination with Debbie Harry.
He loved Deborah Harry of Blondie. They were like the embodiment of that crazy mod 60s beach culture. I mean, Blondie did songs like Love on the Pier or I Didn't Have the Nerve to Say No with all, you know, Farfisa organ and those little 60s hand claps and go-go dresses.
When I met him, he was in this, you know, Agent 99, you know, Barbara Feldon and Get Smart look.
That look is not the kind of look that would make a woman go, yeah, him.
Jeffrey had a really horrible history of like falling completely in love with women that didn't give a fuck about him.
He was almost the equivalent of like your gay best friend.
He was like helplessly in love with a lot of women all the time.
I think that Jeffrey really related on many levels, emotionally, psychologically, to women and what they were going through.
The bulk of the girls we had lived in our heads. There was a huge fantasy life. Yeah.
One of the first things that Jeffrey ever said to me was, "What are you?" And I thought that was a little odd. And then he said to me, "Well, I'm half Mexican." And I didn't think he looked half Mexican. I told him I couldn't tell. And he said, "We're both half-breeds."
We actually lived one suburb away from each other. He grew up in El Monte and I grew up in La Puente. So we grew up with you know, with Chicano culture.
In non-white cultures, it is a matriarchy. Jeffrey's mother and sister, although I don't personally know them, they seem to be a really strong and positive influence on him.
His mother's Latino, you know, and it was a real kind of Latino thing, this whole like attachment to family and what that means to people.
Jeffrey did get a lot of support from his mother. I think he was probably able to talk to both his mother and his sister in a way that he couldn't talk to his peers or other teenagers.
He was not comfortable around a lot of people, I guess.
The idea of being a half-breed and not fitting in with either or really sort of polarized culture of what our halves were seemed to be, at least, you know, from where I stood, a constant theme in Jeffrey's struggle and probably why he was such an intense artist.
He had already had this electric guitar he bought, this SG, a Gibson SG that he had for years. He couldn't play real well.
His first songs were really poppy and really easy, carefree, like nursery rhyme-like lyrics, you know, sort of 60s influenced pop songs.
He was really, you know, another guy in his bedroom with a cool guitar.
He was really interested in crazy, carefree, funny girl pop records, you know, and his first band, the Red Lights, kind of reflected that.
I don't know if they ever played, and all I've heard is the demo. I have a copy of the demo at home. But yeah, it's, you know, it's pretty good.
He encouraged everyone to perform.
He and I had this little band for a while, We did this rehearsal at his mother's house in the Valley. She was living at the Valley at the time. So originally it was going to be this blues and reggae hybrid band that never happened. And I think we learned one or two songs and called Pleasant Up and said, oh, you got to hear this, and played it for her over the phone. And that was it. That was the entire thing the band did.
Jeffrey was hugely instrumental in Pleasant eventually becoming a performer.
Finally, one day he said, you should have a band. And I was like, you know, I really don't want to have one. And he's like, well, too bad, because I put one together for you.
She kind of had no choice. She had to do it.
Jeffrey got us a gig at Gazzari's, and we all got so insanely drunk on Jack Daniels. Somehow a fist fight broke out on stage, and everyone, I mean, it was in the band. It was like Jeffrey and the drummer and Johnny, and everyone in the whole band was in the fist fight. And I think Jeffrey barfed on stage, too, on the side of the stage.
I thought, you know, he really was maybe aiming below his abilities by, you know, struggling with the guitar.
They thought it was like the most punk rock thing they'd ever seen. They didn't realize that it was supposed to be a rockabilly band. It was supposed to be this nice, wholesome rockabilly band, and it was like the worst train wreck ever. It was really, really terrible.
There was an element of humor to it, like an insane kind of humor, only for the people that knew that, you know, how insane it was.
Jeffrey was very willful and stubborn, my viewpoint anyways, and that a guy like that, when he puts his mind to something, is going to succeed.
He would not be limited by anything. He would do whatever he wanted to do.
He really felt that he had struck a vein, and he was unshakable.
He was just simply going to stuff his head with knowledge, express that knowledge somehow, and it just didn't make any difference who was behind him, who was with him doing it, or who was in front of him watching him do it.
He related in the way prescient, bright, original people do to art and creativity and the imagination and wanting to be creative, and there was no other way. He was going to find it on that path. And honestly, he did not have social graces.
He was sitting right next to Chuck from Black Flag. And I didn't know Jeffrey, I didn't really know who he was or what he was about, but I definitely knew the one guy because, you know, in a gigantic punk rock band. And Jeff was just sort of having his way. Like, you don't know anything about music.
The first time I ever met Jeffrey Lee Pierce was at a party at the Tropicana hotel on Santa Monica Boulevard.
We were both really drunk at this party.
And then somehow a mock fight broke out between Jeffrey Lee and Fast Freddy.
Somehow we got the idea that we were best friends, and because of that we should fight.
And the next thing you see is Freddy was on the ground on this motel room floor, and Jeffrey was on top of him with his knees on his collar.
I was just in pain. He's going, get up, come on, we gotta fight, we're best friends, we gotta fight. I go, you fight, find another best friend. I was in pain.
He broke Fast Freddy's collarbone.
It was my Monday night DJ thing. It was supposed to start that night at the Starwood, because I had a Monday night residency as a DJ there. That was my first night, and I was in a hospital. I couldn't go.
I went off to New York City, and I had a place in the Village, and Jeff stayed with me in New York for 5 or 6 months. And I was shooting some photos for magazines, and a friend, an acquaintance, had some magazines on the newsstands. And I was really trying to encourage Jeff with his writing, and I got Jeff his first writing gigs with this magazine called Record Review Magazine. And Jeff started writing these reviews. He was loving New York, but he wasn't really finding he was trying to put together a band. He was looking for, you know, a band. Jeff, I guess, didn't have a lot of luck in New York, and took off.
I didn't go to Jamaica with Jeff, but he came back with a bunch of stories about it.
He was an adventurer and traveler in search of reggae.
If you go down there and get too curious, they'll cut you up and you know, fuck you over if you're, you know, at one of those nightclubs. apparently stuck pretty close to the hotel room.
Mostly got hustled.
Probably the better part of valor to just go ahead and say, you know what, I'm just going to stay in the room and I'll imagine what I was doing at these clubs with these Rastafarians.
He sent me this postcard, so that would have been 79, I suppose. The postcard reads, "Finally got home. I went to Jamaica for a very long time. I went to New Orleans for another long time, and Memphis. When I came home last July, Slash Magazine asked me to write for them. My articles are in all the recent issues. It's very late now. I'm going to sleep. Ranking Jeffrey Lee."
You know, the little fuck. The first way I knew of Jeffrey was he was ranking Jeffrey Lee, and he was a writer for Slash, and he always used to write the reggae reviews. And which I was very heavily into reggae, and I was also, before I was a musician, I was actually a journalist. I wrote for magazines and different things, and I bailed on that, but I was still sending stuff out, and I was writing for like New York Rocker and things like that, and I would send stuff to Slash, and I would never get a response. And finally I found out Jeffrey would be in the office, would find the mail, would go through the mail, because he was basically anything that was competition, he was ripping up. So he was ripping up my shit.
Slash was a very large format newspaper style fanzine in Los Angeles that was really nice, a very high quality publication, and it really, a lot of us felt like it kind of legitimized the scene in a way, and so whoever was associated with that or wrote for it, instantly took on, some kind of glow.
It was actually good to know that it wasn't my writing just really sucked and these guys in LA hated it, or something, but it was just fucking Jeffrey being like, Jeffrey.
He was writing for Slash Magazine and different things, and that's one of the things we kind of bonded on, was that we were, interested in writing about music as well as like being record collectors, and he was doing his Blondie fan club.
It was only beneficial to make him the president of their fan club because he was a real fan. I remember Blondie were staying at the Sunset Marquis Hotel, and Jeffrey really wanted to be in there. Jeffrey had found a shopping cart that was in the hall. Jeffrey was inside the shopping cart, and either Pleasant or I was pushing him down the hall when Debbie came out in the hall, and I think that was the moment that won Debbie Harry's heart. I think she understood that his heart was in the right place, that he idolized her for all the right reasons, that he loved the music, he loved the image, he understood what Blondie was trying to accomplish.
Jeffrey was the president of the Blondie fan club, and Kid Congo was the West Coast president of the Ramones fan club.
And I think we got terribly drunk, and we started talking a lot about writing, or a lot about music, a lot about traveling. He had been traveling. He had been to Jamaica and New York, and I'd been in Europe and London and New York as well. And we were just talking about bands we liked and this and that. And eventually, kind of at the end, before, like when we went in, or maybe before the end of the night, it was like, well, we should have a band together. And I was like, well, I don't play any instrument or anything. He was like, well, why don't you just be the singer? And I was like, no, I'm not going to be the singer. And I said, I definitely am not going to be the singer. And so he just said, like, well, you can be the guitar player, I'll be the singer, and we'll make a band, and I'll teach you. I have an extra guitar hanging around, and I'll teach you how to play. And so I was like, ooh. Okay.
It was really interesting because Kid really couldn't play guitar, and Jeffrey really couldn't play guitar, and Don Snowden was an okay bass player. He was heavily into the meters and things like that. So, and I had Brad Dunning. I don't know what he listened to, but they kind of had this weird, swampy, different sound.
I think we actually pretty much, played out right away.
I was the booking agent for the Blasters at that time. We were just a local band, and so I'd call all the clubs, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there was a club called the Hong Kong Cafe in Chinatown, and the Blasters got a month of Saturdays, so we could book whoever we wanted to be our opening acts. And then I get a phone call from Jeffrey Lee Pierce saying, yeah, he screwed up, man. That gig, your Saturday night gig, that's ours. That's our gig. And I was like, no, it isn't. It's blah, blah, blah. We went back and forth. And then I realized he was trying to scam me into getting a gig. And I kind of respected that. I thought that was kind of funny. And so I gave him the gig.
And I can remember someone from the audience saying, maybe if we're quiet, they'll go away. That was the first time I ever saw the Gun Club.
I remember we played some really terrifying music. Horribly awful.
They did a couple of gigs with Snowden, and the other guys, he taught them how to play. He taught Kid Congo how to play guitar.
He gave me like a Bo Diddley record, a guitar, a slide, and he said like, oh, this is how blues players play in open E tuning.
It was really interesting because it was all new to them. And so when Kid Congo was playing slide guitar, he wasn't trying to sound like either Dwayne Allman or Elmore James. He wouldn't know where to go to do that.
Actually, Jeffrey made a tape for all of us. This tape kind of was the genesis of what was to become the Gun Club, and it was a lot of like murder ballads and just like things really kind of some like normal ballads, like, you know, like Marty Robbins, gunfighter ballads.
It was moody, and it was you know, here was Jeffrey who couldn't sing like Tommy Johnson or Charlie Patton, or trying to sing that way and trying to carry off this sort of myth of him being one of those kind of guys. And it kind of, like I said, it worked.
But I don't think more than 5 people ever came to see one of our shows. So I think that kind of lineup eventually dispersed. And we decided we wanted to keep on playing.
Rob Ritter and I played together in the Bags. They wore bags on their heads. It started out as a joke, as a lot of punk bands did. And I mean, it's a literal joke. But of course, you know, a joke, you sort of like doing it, and you really don't want to give it up, even after the laughs are gone. So you get kind of serious, and it becomes a band. But the Bags ran their course, you know, through punk rock, L.A., but when that was over, Rob and I were kind of, you know, he was the bass player, I was the drummer, so we were just sort of kind of a unit looking for something to do.
I think Terry and Rob had seen us and had really taken to the attitude of the band, and for whatever reasons.
It was sloppy, it was not good, but it was very intriguing. And that was enough.
That really changed things really, really a lot, you know, because they could play really well, and they were a rhythm section that was ready-made. The Gun Club at this time, we were playing to 15 people a show, and there was no record, there was no anything. So one day I just got a call from Ivy of the Cramps asking me if, you know, you want to, you know, would you be interested to be in our band? And I was like, oh, I don't know, you know, I don't know how to play. Of course, I called Jeffrey immediately and was like, what do I do? What do I do? You know, the Cramps asked me to play, and he's like, are you crazy? You should do it. I'd do it in a minute. The only question she said was like, well, what are you willing to sacrifice? And I was like, well, what, like, you know, going to college or moving or my band or what? She's like, oh no, I mean, like, would you be willing to sacrifice a finger or something? I said, I'll get back to you on that. And so that was that, and Jeffrey's blessing, off I went.
And so we needed a guitar player, and then that's how we found Ward.
I was a huge Cramps fan, and I saw Ivy at the Whiskey, and I said, you're my favorite band, etc., etc. Can I be in your band? She said, well, you got to write a letter to this lady and send a picture. And so I did that and took a week off of work because I just knew they were going to call me. And of course, that didn't happen. And they picked Kid, and I was a little crestfallen. And maybe later that week, I saw Jeff at a Billy Zoom concert. And I just went up to him and said, are you still looking for a guitar player? And I didn't say, I want to be in your band. I like your band. anything to that, effect. And the next day I was in the gun club.
Ward brought a lot of interesting things to the band.
I embellished some things that Kid was doing, better guitar player than he was, but the fact that he couldn't play really it was just a great mishmash. The open E tuning was an idea that Jeff had to get Kid in his band. Instead of playing an E chord, you just tune the guitar to an E chord, and then he could just shout out numbers to him, like open, 3, 5, 7. I guess Kid had numbers on the side of his guitar, and then Jeff could just show him how to play the songs, but they couldn't do minor chords. It was this like kind of weird caveman punk rock.
The whole point to punk rock was that we could reclaim rock and roll. In the middle and late 70s, rock and roll was a corpulent blob of gristle that was dead, that was busy, bent over, sucking its own cock, and every time it would come, it would lay back down and then bend back over again and start sucking its own cock again. And there was no room in there for anything else other than its own penis that it feeds on, and the money and the hair and the quaaludes and all the stuff, all the disgusting mess that rock and roll had become. And then you have disco come along out of left field, which, while rock and roll is sucking its own dick, disco crawls up from behind it and tries to fuck it in the ass at the same time. So you have a mess here.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Whatever you just said, man, my brain is pudding.
Tell me a little bit about the making of Fire of Love.
I don't know. We weren't together, but a few months before we started thinking about putting a record out.
Tito LaRiva, who was in the Plug, said, hey, I'll give you some money to make a demo, and then I'm going to put out these EPs that'll be just one side of a 33 1/3 LP. This is my, my gimmick.
To say it was a tight budget is really not really describing it.
We went in at, I don't know what time, really late, and recorded about 5 or 6 songs.
Basically, you just go in, you turn the machine on, you play your songs, and then you walk out the door as quickly as you can.
Then he was having trouble getting the label together, and in that interim, Jeffrey took that tape and went over to Slash, where he used to work, and would just play it on a cassette. And I guess through doing that, Bob Biggs heard it and said, "What's this?" And Chris D, who is the singer in the Flesh Eaters and also worked at Slash, totally championed the band and convinced Bob Biggs to put this, measly little record out on Ruby, which was a subsidiary of Slash.
Chris D came in and, working with Jeff, they created the final product. And so even though half the songs are sound a little bit different than the other half, I mean, to me, it's still a pretty cohesive whole.
Fire of Love was definitely a seminal record. No record sounded like Fire of Love before it. It was certainly had its influences in all of Jeff's blues records, and the Cramps and X kind of getting the wheels in motion that you could combine punk with another genre and it could be really interesting. But Fire of Love was, 11 songs that are just perfect.
When I first heard Fire of Love, I was seriously blown away because you could hear lyrics and hear intonations that were not at all audible on stage.
And you could finally hear what Jeffrey was singing about, and he's, as good a lyricist as was writing from that period since.
He adopted this great persona of this refugee Civil War soldier, almost like everyone was talking about Vietnam in the late 60s. Jeffrey was talking about Civil War in the early 80s. And so you had Jeffrey Lee Pierce as a 22-year-old kid from the Valley, no nexus to anything involved at that time. And he just wrote these great songs about, riding on a black train. This kid didn't ride on a black train.
He tied in what we picked up in the theatrical, what he picked up in his writings like Faulkner, Beckett and Burroughs and Pinter, and created this kind of character, this alter ego that he could slide into.
And then boom, that record got made and it came out, and immediately people got it.
For us to get the word out, of course, we had to tour like every other band has to, but really, again, it was totally do-it-yourself. I mean, the first Gun Club tour, we went to Rocket Rent-A-Car.
It actually said "Rent a Rocket" on the side of the van.
This beat-up van.
The shittiest van that has ever been made.
There's nothing in it, and so we stuffed ourselves, our equipment, and a few good luck charms, and, hit the road.
We went out and worked the record.
Yeah, we
played
worked
the
it.
South and the Midwest, and in a perfect time of year, February, because the weather's so mild in the United States, in the Midwest and the North.
The thing that just took us completely by surprise was the reaction the record got almost immediately everywhere east of the Mississippi.
And then when he went to New York and he got on the cover of New York Rocker, that was a big deal. New York Rocker was, in those days was the Rolling Stone for the alternative music set.
That was a shocker, and not because it was a gun club. Just seeing Jeffrey's face so large on the cover of a magazine was kind of shocking.
The New York Times, Robert Palmer was their rock critic, I think, at the time, and he wrote a review of Dylan's new record and the Gun Club Fire of Love record. And the New York Times does not do new bands, and he basically said, in with the new, out with the old. That is awfully heady stuff from some band that no one gave two shits about in L.A. So sudden, instant credibility in New York, in Boston.
Our first show we did in Boston, I mean, it was about the most amazing live experience I've ever had. They were just packed into this club. The energy was just so thick you could cut it with a knife.
It just sort of caught on, like in hot spots that were later hot spots, like Minneapolis and Austin, Texas, college towns.
Shortly thereafter, we went to London, and the first show at the venue, which held 1,200 people, was sold out. And the reviews were great.
The French ate it up, and all of Europe, and it's a great record.
I mean, we all felt great. If it made you feel great, to be that well liked. But I think that maybe that's when it started, where this adoration, in Jeff's mind, kind of became separated from the band as a whole. It wasn't Gun Club adoration; it was adoration for me.
Remember, the band went on stage, and it was packed house, about 1,000 people, and got a nice ovation. We started playing some song, and then Jeff walked on later, and it was like the Grinch's heart or whatever. I saw his head just go boom, 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 boom,
and he would never really let on that this kind of thing was going on inside of him. He always tried to kind of play everything down, but in fact, yes, this just boosted his ego like nothing else.
Man, I didn't ask for any of this shit.
There were a lot of friends of the bands, and after we would do shows, some of these temporary friends would show up, and there always seemed to be friends there waiting for Jeffrey. And so I just felt like I knew Jeffrey had a girlfriend problem, because I never really saw him with a girl.
So much of what he talked about in the songs was kind of like the dark side of romance, the dark side of relationships, the dark side. I mean, not that it was a kind of confessional writing, because there was more stories, but that's so bizarre that I never even thought of him as like a sexual being, even though he totally was, but he was never hooked up with anybody.
Girls would be nice to him because his star was rising, but I don't ever remember him hooking up with any girls, except for what's her name, Tex.
She was waitressing at the lingerie, and I think that's where they met, and he became infatuated with her, obsessed.
Jeffrey Lee and Tex was like a Pygmalion kind of thing, where he was molding her in his image.
Jeff, what are you doing here?
He had enough of a vision that he basically formed Tex and the Horseheads.
Jeffrey formed Tex and the Horseheads as a side project for Texacala Jones, And Jeffrey played a few shows with Kathy DeGran, and then he had to leave to go to Europe, and enlisted me to play the guitar.
That was great. And you know, they did cover songs.
They were very much in his style, and I'm not sure if he told them they were, you know, that they were his or not.
I remember I used to DJ at Club Lingerie, and one day I'm playing "Slip Away," the Clarence Carter record.
And I don't think Tex knew it was a cover until maybe a few years later. She found out, I think, through Fast Freddy.
You know, she comes running up to me, goes, "Where did you get this? They're doing my song." I go, "This is from 1967, Tex." You know.
It was funny because later on, you know, I mean, I realized Jeffrey had this kind of penchant for women that looked exactly like Tex.
She had a wild look, you know, hair, clothes, everything, and it was just leathered and laced and sleazy, and it was a cool look, actually. And Jeff loved it, and I think he just felt this connection with her.
I like that song on the record, you know, where the drums go boom, 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 and then you have these saxophones and the guitar.
And I remember they opened for the Gun Club in New York. I mean, he flew her to New York and just force-fed her to the Gun Club audience, and he played guitar, and someone told me that when the Gun Club was playing, like the security guard was banging her, and
Tex also was supposed to be the girlfriend of the guitar player in Parliament Funkadelic. I don't know.
We always used to speculate if they were like sleeping with each other, you know. But I don't know if they were or not.
Tex and Jimmy Joe had sparks there for a few minutes, so that caused friction with Jeffrey, who was a very, very jealous young man.
It just had to be torturous to be, you know, the guy who's the star of the band and just cannot seem to get anything going.
So then, I mean, as the band got, you know, that critical acclaim was there, and then fans started to follow in behind it. It was from the East Coast. We had offers, you know, from booking agents and people in New York. Basically, and of course, you know, Jeff had always had some kind of relationship, I guess, with Blondie, the band, on some level. And then when they got their Vanity label, we were one of the bands that they had considered, because we'd already kind of made a name for ourselves by that time anyway. And so really the band had shifted from LA to a New York band.
He started hanging out with some other people and trying to score drugs. I mean, it's weird. Like, I drank more than he did, but I didn't act like a complete idiot. It had a different effect on him. You know, he's kind of mad anyway, and it just made him even more, you know, crazed.
I remember one time at the Ninth Circle, this bar we used to all go to in New York. That was when Jeff was starting to really get a lot into heroin.
Jeffrey wanted to be a drug addict and an alcoholic, and it's a terrible thing to want to aspire to be. But apparently he got his wish, because that happened for him.
All right, this song's about people who are worried about should be into drugs.
So we recorded Miami in New York at a very small studio that I never liked. I never ever liked the sound of that record, and I don't know anyone who does. It's too bad. I thought some of Gun Club's really good songs were on that record.
Miami was an improvement over Fire of Love for a couple reasons. I think Jeffrey's lyric writing had progressed in that year or so. Some of those songs were definitely a carryover from the first record. I know Bad Indian and the title track from the first one. There are also a lot of harmonies on that record that Fire of Love never dreamed of.
But at that time, the band was really starting to split apart. It was going to Jeff's head. There he is. Chris Stein's next to him. He's producing a record. And somebody is telling him, you don't need your band. All you need is you.
I think we should have stayed with Slash, and we should have had somebody different produce the second record. That was a huge career mistake.
I think had he been with less understanding guys, He might have been minus a tooth or two after telling you to your face that he doesn't need you. He can put anybody in the band and still do the same thing.
It was a culmination of that first lineup. And at that time, Rob isn't featured on the cover, I know, because he quit before it came out.
And that's really when the band ended. As soon as Rob quit the band, I was like, well, shit. I guess what can I get out of this? You know, are we going to Europe again? I'd like to do that. That's a terrible attitude to have. You know, the writing is on the wall. I mean, Rob was really half the reason I was in the band, and the other half was Terry.
Ward left, and I'm sure he thought, you know, it sucked that I stayed in the band, and because he and Jeff just did not get along.
So we finished up this U.S. tour, which was just, you know, every day it was just inches from belting him. And the last week, there were maybe like 3 or 4 shows left, and the roadie came in my room and said, you know, Jeffrey's packing his bag. I just heard him make a reservation at the airport for a plane ticket. He's leaving. He's a cowardly guy too, you know. He wasn't going to tell anybody. He was just going to skip out. And I went into his room and I said, look, motherfucker, you're finishing this tour. Unpack your bags. We're finishing this tour. You're not leaving us high and dry, okay? And we finished the tour, and that was the last I ever talked to him. You know, I got home and someone said, hey, I saw Gun Club has a new record out, and I wasn't on it, so I assumed I wasn't in the band anymore. But you know, it was a get fired, quit, you know, thing all the way around. He hated me and I hated him.
He and Jeff just did not get along at all. They could not see eye to eye on anything at that point.
That was the end of the Gun Club for me. And I cried a million tears.
I introduced the idea of bringing in Patricia as a bass player to the band after Rob left and went to 45 Grave.
Inadvertently, Alice Bag's band became a definite, you know, AAA team for the Gun Club. You know, it's really funny how that worked out.
It's strange how things work because, again, even for me, I was starting to think, well, you know, there's probably going to be another band I'm going to have to be in because this one is, I don't trust it, and I don't think it's going to last very long. And so when I finally left the band, obviously, you know, dumping on them in a tour, which I don't feel bad about. Didn't then, don't now.
From there, Jeffrey was like, okay, I'm going to get the new Gun Club together.
I'd had it with playing in the band I was in for various reasons. And I told the booking agent, who also booked the Gun Club, that I no longer intended to play with the Panther Burns after this tour. The booking agent said, I think I might have something for you.
Duckworth could play a lot of shit. I mean, he was a really, really awesome guitar player.
They ended up hiring DEE Pop and me, and we were the new additions to the Gun Club along with Patricia Morrison.
Patricia was kind of the odd person out in the band because she was really quiet.
She took me to an Irish bar the first night I met her and talked to me about what to expect from Jeffrey, that he was somewhat inconsiderate and volatile.
You'd see her in the daytime with her hair down, and it was like this, you know, librarian, and then like, you know, 2 cans of Aquanet later, and it was...
I was learning the songs off Miami, and I got a call to come and record. Apparently, Tex and the Horsehead session had canceled, and I was to come to New York that night and record. Of course, I think we rehearsed that night and started recording the next day. Recording these songs that became the EP Death Party.
The record was made in the studio. It was really written. I never had worked in a situation where like tracks weren't written yet, but on a piece of paper. And when we played House on Highland Avenue, Jeffrey basically didn't have a song. He hummed it to me in the cans and went da la 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 la. Okay, just play 4 measures of doo doo ba ba doo doo ba, and then okay, after 4, do a little roll because we're going to be into a chorus.
I think that was kind of a missed opportunity, and too bad we didn't get something a little bit more thorough from that lineup, because the live shows were intense.
We played the East Coast for about 2 or 3 weeks and then went to Europe, where we played about 56 dates in almost as many days.
The French tour we did was so out of control on drugs. Like, I remember the first gig we did, we played 8 songs for 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Dee had a history of using junk and could do it. Dee could drink heavily.
I left on that tour with a broken hand. I had a bunch of broken fingers and went to a doctor the day before we were supposed to leave, and the doctor said, you have 3 choices. You can re-break the hand and put it in a cast, put a cast on it just the way it was, or the other thing was just go on the fucking tour and leave it alone and let it heal eventually, which is what I did.
Dee's knuckle was way back. Oh, I don't know how far back in his hand, from having been in a fight.
So needless to say, it hurt like a motherfucker, and I needed all the self-medication I could find, which was not something I wasn't probably going to do anyway, but in this case, I had an excuse. You know, we got off a plane in Paris, and the promoter goes, oh, you need something to wake you up? And we were like, yeah, we were expecting, you know, white lines, and he gives us dope instead. So I remember we had to go up this spiral staircase up to the stage, and we're walking up, and the first person that did the line goes, guys, this isn't coke. We'd be throwing up over the railing and, you know, hitting probably Patricia, who was the last one who wasn't doing any drugs at the beginning of the tour. But, you know, that was the first day of the tour, and that was the mildest part.
Got to France, and we get there, and we're supposed to sign records. Well, they're giving us Miami, which is the new Gun Club record. Of course, since Dee and I aren't on there, and since we've been drinking, we started signing that record and, well, other records. Eddie Cochran records, Sibelius records.
We did this gig in Paris in a festival outside where a gun club opened for U2. And the promoter's kids...
These children were 9, 10, 12, I suppose. And they were a band. And they played a version of Sex Beat. They played a version of Sex Beat in French.
And they were really cool little kids. They were all decked out in punk rock gear and, you know, creepers and leopard skin and little mohawks. And they were, like, just fucking adorable, you know. And you just saw them and you were like, you guys play Sex Beat? You guys have to play for us.
We asked the promoters if these kids could play Sex Beat before we did. Of course not. No, they cannot. So naturally, we had to have them up there. So what we did is we had them stand around nearby, behind the fence. I think there was a small fence. And right before we played, we pulled them up on stage, gave them our equipment, and said go. And they started playing Sex Beat.
But they only knew this one song, and they didn't even know how to end it. So they just kept repeating verse after verse after verse, and then they go back to the top and go. So they probably ran through the song like 4 or 5 times. And like they played it for about 20 minutes, like really, truly 20 minutes. And U2, especially Bono, was just livid, man. He was just like, what are these fucking kids doing? So me and Duckworth and Patricia had to actually go out and physically carry these kids off the stage because they didn't know how to actually end their song. We were all really trashed anyway, so we were making the promoter give us each a case of beer, and we were just tossing the cans back into like U2's equipment, because of course we had to like set up in front of U2. It was like, because they were U2. And but I remember then finally when they played, they had to spend another 20 minutes taking out all these cans out of their bass drum, which was right behind me. So I kept throwing my cans into their bass drum, so they came out and went boom, bang, and it was like all these cans rattling, so I had to stop again.
I always felt that Jeffrey was very poor at drinking. He would have 2 or 3 drinks and then he would cry. I remember being with him in New Orleans. He expressed an interest in scoring some heroin, so I hooked up with a musician friend. And I can remember sitting in a car, having to explain to Jeffrey what Dilaudid was. While the New Orleans musician looked on in disgust. Of course, you know, we were wicked little fucks in our early 20s.
our tour manager had this farm, and on a couple of days off, we went to this farm to chill out. Except we had nothing there but drugs and booze. There was like no food. And Jimmy, the tour manager, goes, "Hey, partner, check out this gun. There's Jeffrey." Nobody expected me to really start shooting over Jeffrey's head, but Jeffrey's like in the field, and you could see, like, you know, it's like cornfields. You could see Jeffrey's head ducking down and like running through the field, going, "Dave, what the fuck you doing? Stop!" I was like, "Jeffrey, you motherfucker! This is the last time you're gonna pull this shit." You know, and he's just like, "You didn't fuck with me too much more ever again."
I can remember torturing Jeffrey by doing versions of his lyrics. I remember Dee and I did Texas Serenade as Yogi Bear and Boo Boo. And I can just remember him telling, "Stop!"
He would do stuff like want to arm wrestle me and things like that. And like, you know, it would be pretty queer after a while. It's like, "Jeffrey, come on now. I know I can beat you tonight." Good Jeff, you know, it's like, be 4 in the morning, we'd all be toast, and you'd be like, "Hey, D, let's arm wrestle." Like, Jeffrey, you know, but he would do strange shit like that in the middle of the night.
Dee was really the kind of person that Jeffrey wanted to portray himself as being. Dee really had used junk at length. Dee really could drink a lot. Dee really did fight. Jeffrey was never good at all these things.
You know, we shared a lot of things, and I thought that was genuine and not just for whatever reasons, or, you know, I'm going to be with Dee because he's cool for 10 minutes right now or whatever. But I generally, like, we did stuff together that was, we talked about a lot of shit, and, you know, books and art and whatever. And I think we thought of each other as close friends. But Jeffrey was a really bad business person. You know, he was the gun club, he owned the gun club, he, you know, called the shots or didn't call the shots, and he had management, and between it all, they figured out all the money from the last tours, and there was nothing left to pay anybody else, I don't think, except for like dirt, you know, chump change. That's the way the bands are, you know, it's like, you know, there's always the money fuck-ups. The money fucks up everything, generally.
Money fucked it up, but, you know, worse than money fucking it up was some sort of I guess it's money fucking it up. It was like a conservatism that, you know, or like a chicken shit, you know, safety mechanism of the people that wanted to make money and thought they knew, you know, where the, you know, how to slay the golden goose and do it, that they were just going to ignore like a whole generation of rock and musicians. You know, like they had the nerve to think that like the music that comes off, you know, just off the street and out of the, you know, out of the garages and all this shit, you know, isn't some sort of natural outpouring of, you know, the nation's music.
I feel an affinity for anybody in any band anywhere, you know, because we're all in the same boat against the shitheads, you know. So, you know, I always felt that music was like the mafia, you know, we're all in the thing together, you know, we're going to fight the outside world.
I think Jeffrey's entire thing was a commercial impediment. I mean, he was intellectually too intense. The music was too indie for mainstream acceptance, and that voice was like kind of that wounded caterwaul, which is not pleasing to the, you know, brain-damaged, mediocre masses who lap up FM fodder, you know, perpetrated by Clear Channel and their cronies.
In fact, a lot of the great bands in LA couldn't even make albums, like the Alley Cats and different great bands. People never saw the Alley Cats when we got to get that down and, you know, make an album immediately. They didn't even get to make an album until 79 or 80, and they've been rocking the house for a few years at that point. All the London bands had all been signed and gone.
He was going to be at the mercy of distribution anyway, and advertising, you know. And bands don't have that money, you know. Just as you're starting out, you have to get signed. Unfortunately, when you get signed, usually they sit on you and they don't promote you, you know. Or they try and change you, which has always been a puzzle to me. Like, why sign a band and then try and change them completely from what you signed? I never understood that, you know. It's like a guy gets married and the chick changes him, you know. So no other chicks will fancy him anymore, you know.
You know, you see this kind of shambling screw up. And I go, what can he do? I mean, you don't even want to give him a car. You know, you're like, I need to do my laundry. We'll do it for you. I mean, he'll never even figure out a washing machine. Not because he's stupid, just he's one of those people like, him have a straight job, it could never work. He could never work in that world. It's like you could never have Iggy be a waiter.
He wasn't an accountant, and he wasn't that savvy, like, you know, like, this is a business in my band. You know, it wasn't like that.
Don't give him a real job. They can't balance a checkbook. They can't do anything, but they can do that thing. Jeffrey's one of those guys.
I think Jeffrey decided he didn't want to be around Dee anymore. I think he was intimidated by Dee and just failed to call him back to come play some more shows.
If I wanted to be Jeffrey's friend, it was better that I wasn't in the band with him. And I wanted to stay his friend and be friends with him. And that meant, you know, me doing what I needed to do. So, I mean, Jeffrey, it was Jeffrey's band, and I wasn't looking for a democratic thing by any means, but it was pretty chaotic. So
we played some shows in Los Angeles without Dee. That would have been with Terry Graham back on drums, and Terry Graham is an excellent drummer. He really gave the band a lift in a way that you could really feel on stage, in a way very few drummers could. We played a few shows in Los Angeles, and we were going to play in Australia, but neither Terry nor I could get any information on how much we were to get paid for this.
We met Jeffrey at the airport in San Francisco with Patricia. Jeffrey was being an enormous asshole that night, and basically told us, well, you know, if you want to be in the band, there's the gate, there's the doorway into the plane, get on the plane and I'll see you in Australia. And Jim and I just kind of looked at each other like, get on that plane with a surly guy who we really just don't like anymore, and fly for 16, 18 hours for a handful of shows we have no idea if we'll make any money from. So we basically said, you know what, we're going to go rent a car and we're going to drive back to Los Angeles.
We really felt that we were getting dicked around, and I think finally they said, well, you can save your per diem. You'll have something that way. That's the daily operating expenses for eating and what have you.
Patricia was very brave. We told her what we were going to do, but she went ahead and got on the plane and went over there with him. I respect her for that. I thought it was very brave. But Jim and I just, we got the fuck out of Dodge.
And there's this big tour booked, and, you know, everyone was freaking out. So Jeffrey, like, you know, a day or two after getting there, gave me a call and said, like, can you come to Australia, like, now? And I was like, well, yeah, of course. You ask, I shall come. And also I was, like, really off my, you know, the Cramps was definitely off the books by then. And so we went and did an Australian tour with me, Patricia, Jeff, and two Australian pickup guys. So we did this crazy tour. You know, it was pretty ramshackle and makeshift, but a lot of fun. I think we were taking a lot of drugs, but it was at a time when drugs were kind of still working in our favor and still hadn't imploded on us at the time. You know, there was still, I think we weren't full on drug addicts. We were, you know, weekenders or whatever. And so we, you know, made some crazy alcohol and drug-filled celebrations. And people, I think, had fun and loved it. You know, Australians are such yabos anyway, and they dug it and understood us. So we came back from this Australian tour, and somehow Terry was back in the band, or whatever reasons, because there was, you know, because he was the best thing we had going. So Jeffrey had already written songs by then, like some of the Las Vegas Story songs, and we were still on Animal Records on Chris Stein's label, which Miami had been on in the Death Party EP. And so we started recording in Los Angeles at Ocean Way Studios. And I think Kris had gotten ill at this time. So someone at Chrysalis was overseeing the project. And so I think maybe they suggested this guy, Jeff Irick, who ended up producing the record.
The Las Vegas story was certainly, production-wise, kind of like a more legit album. It was not produced by a friend, you know, even though Chris D and Chris Stein did a great job with the time and money provided to them. It was their first really, you know, someone put a lot of TLC and money into that production. You can certainly hear it.
The one thing about the Gun Club and us, and like, you know, we had very excessive behavior, you know, especially Jeffrey and myself. And the thing is, we always really were able to pull it together for recording. Was always a serious thing to us.
Las Vegas story was great because it was bringing everyone back together, everyone from Los Angeles. You got Kid back playing with Jeff, which was a great thing because that was the initial forming of the Gun Club, and Kid and Jeff worked really well together. And you had Patricia on bass and Terry on drums, two original bags. And so seeing all those people back together again was a very good thing.
Well, it is Las Vegas, and the inspiration for Las Vegas story, part of the inspiration. Actually, Vegas has always been an inspirational place for a gun club. We're always making pilgrimages here, always thinking about it, the trashy side of it, the mob-run Vegas. Basically the Vegas that doesn't exist anymore, but, you know, it's one of those things, if it definitely inspired us, no matter what, and if it inspired us, you can bet it inspired Las Vegas story. This is like the only place you can find old Vegas, but it's so fucking ratted out that you know, you can't come down here, and these places, they look decent from the outside, but it's basically one giant crack boulevard, in a sense, the underbelly of America. I mean, that was always Jeff's thing.
Jeffrey's escape was blues and, you know, burros and a lot of the dark, seedier things, whether it's drugs or just who he chose to, like, hang out with, whether, you know, girls.
You know, like Bukowski says, you gotta be on the lowest rung or something, and he dug that. He wrote about being down and out.
One of the cool things I liked about Las Vegas story, besides the fact that it was, you know, it just had a great sound, great producer. But I mean, like Dave Alvin played on that, laid down some really good tracks. And by this time, Jeffrey was really into his lead guitar thing. I mean, he was playing guitar full time by now.
After the Australia thing, yeah, Jeffrey said that, you know, he had been working with Jim Duckworth, who was such a virtuoso and like really amazing a guitar player who could play everything. And it was really great, and we really realized that my style and his style really complemented each other, and I think that's part telepathic because we had played together for so long, and I learned guitar from him.
Jeffrey Lee's guitar chops with all the touring had gotten, you know, pretty good. He played like Jeffrey Lee Pierce, you know, and the band, the guitar sound of the band was there, all the little parts and nuances of you know, it was noisy, but it made sense, you know, and it was all kind of loosely worked out. And then he called me up and asked if I wanted to play lead guitar on a couple things, and I thought, I don't know what I would do, but I went down to the studio, and I think I was playing Fender Mustang, and yeah, or maybe I was playing, there may have been a guitar just laying around there. It might have been that kind of thing.
Ry Cooder was doing actually the Paris, Texas soundtrack at the time in the same studio. So there was like really some of his cool stuff there. So we really didn't use it all. But we picked up a thing or two.
And just, yeah, plugged into a Marshall and just made a racket, you know, and we did it a couple of times, and that was it.
That's the thing I think with that Las Vegas story is just it's a good record, but it's a little bit uneven. It's a different record.
It was very much born out of the Brian Geisen cut-up theory, and that, like I said, this was a time when we were influenced like a lot by free jazz and literature, and like a lot of beat literature, especially.
Jeffrey was a huge romantic, as was, in a really insane way, I don't know if people agree with this, Burroughs. It's an incredible vision of another door into of a whole other world right in front of your own nose. And that appeals to Jeffrey in a super powerful way.
Jeffrey was very, 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 you know, taken with William Burroughs, and, you know, had met William Burroughs, and, you know, done some readings with him, and they went to his house when we played in Lawrence, Kansas.
Were you trying to make me work?
The Las Vegas Story Tour, yeah, it was like, I think we went through America back and forth a few times, I think, and then we went to Europe, and it seemed to go on and on and on. And I really loved the Gun Club then. I mean, I was really proud of the band. I think that there was a real magic happening in those live shows for at least the beginning of that tour.
Who's got drugs? Give them up.
But there was a lot of drugs, a lot of drinking, a lot of, you know, it was just kind of a very, very insane way to live. And Jeffrey could be very insufferable at times. And I think that's when he had his trumpet or saxophone or something.
And the door flies open, and here comes Jeffrey, man, and he's got like he's got these cases, like these beat up, you know, leather cases. And he goes, "Hey, man, I just went to the pawn shop, man, and I bought this stuff, man. Which one do you want, man? Do you want the trumpet or do you want the saxophone?"
For me personally, the horn, I wasn't afraid of the horn.
We just started honking away on these things, and Jeffrey just immediately starts going, nah, you know, and we're making this like horrible noise in this bar. The bartender is just like shaking his head.
I just wanted to hide the horn.
I remember him coming out with a trumpet one show, and he had just gotten it that day, and he just played, you know, this just ridiculous shit. Look, I'm you know, Roland Kirk. Well, you're not, Jeffrey, but I'll give you a lot of points for, you know, believing in yourself. It's like, what the fuck is that? It's a bunch of noise.
I just wanted to get the horn and throw it out the fucking bus window.
He wanted to do a jazz gig. So they put it in the LA Weekly, you know, Peter Case and Jeffrey Lee Pierce, you know, their jazz gig. And for some reason, like both, you know, because of both of the bands being involved, the place just packs out with people. But we only knew 2 songs. We did Love Supreme and we did So What.
I think to Jeff, music was not a static thing.
The gig was just a complete disaster.
It was a kind of flowing river, and you splashed in it, you played in it.
We cleared out the club with our horns, man, because like that was a way of like, you know, well, you can't say we sold out, can you? You know what I mean? You can't say, you know, anything about it. We cleared the joint out with a bunch of noise, you know?
It was always a kind of moving, flowing thing.
That's a way of like maintaining your freedom as an artist.
Beholden to no audience, right?
If you blow them out of the club, they can't. The one thing they can't say about you is, you know, you're kissing their ass.
I play backwards trumpet, just like Jimi Hendrix, you know, played guitar behind his back. Right? Is that like a Hendrix type thing?
That was something Jeffrey did throughout his career. As soon as people started liking him for something, he would do something to kind of jam it back in their face. So the next thing you know, we were doing John Coltrane's A Love Supreme, or A Burrito Supreme, as we often refer to it. And he would go on stage with this beat-up, dented trumpet and just blow it and squawk and make a bunch of noises. And it was, again, he was just kind of blowing that trumpet right up the ass of everybody that liked Gun Club.
He would do all sorts of things to sort of piss off audiences.
We wanted to piss people off, and we wanted to make people think, and we wanted to just create an atmosphere of some kind of nihilism.
I think Jeffrey was going for that kind of, gee, is Morrison going to take his penis out on stage kind of vibe? Jeffrey Lee was going for, geez, God, I hope to God Jeffrey Lee doesn't take his penis out on stage,
It was always chaos, and it was always swirling. It was always present, and it was, the goal was to be a troublemaker.
I guess there was a pretty good sized crowd at this club, but they weren't digging what Jeffrey was doing. And finally, at some point, he just turned around to the audience and said, hey, wait, well, you know what? Fuck Texas. And I guess the entire place en masse attacked the stage and caused a minor riot.
If you can say one thing about Jeffrey Lee Pierce, you could say that he was fearless. He was fearless in his dedication to art, and I mean, even though he wasn't a fighter, he would, he'd call somebody a pussy and then run. So that's good. That's a good thing. People don't do often enough.
It really fueled him to piss people off, and the more that, I think the better the more the crowd disliked it sometimes, the more he enjoyed it, and the farther he would take it.
I mean, I just took it as it went, but I was investing time in this thing, and so I wanted to get something back, if not a career, at least a legitimate musical statement that would allow us to live off of it, so we could continue to create. And after a 2-month European tour, which was going pretty well, actually, I asked the road manager in Paris how much money would be remaining at the end, because, I mean, thousands of fans were showing up at every show. He said none. A week before that, I had 15 hours of live videotape I had taken of every show and interviews, etc. That had been stolen in Manchester, England. So I had real trouble kind of figuring out how I was going to keep doing this. And then Jeff and the rest of the band told me, they're going to stay in London, actually. They're not moving back to the U.S. It's now a London band. And so I didn't have a document of the tour. I wasn't going to get paid for it. And there was effectively not going to be a version of that band in the United States any longer. So I got my passport along with my friend Amy, who was there with me on the tour. And she and I snuck out of the hotel at 6 o'clock one morning. We had to wait, unfortunately, 18 hours to catch a train to Calais in France. But we did. Got the train, got to Calais, got on a hovercraft, went to Dover, England, got on another train, went to London, waited a day, got on a plane, flew to New York, got our car, which was in storage in Queens, drove that car all the way back to Los Angeles, and escaped Gun Club forever.
Terry fit really great and knew the stuff, and teaching another drummer and going through the whole process of getting someone up to that level of intuition is a big drag. And having this great tour and then having all this stuff turned to shit, it's exhausting. Especially when you're on drugs and drunk the whole time. And I think we were feeling like we couldn't create something new or better at that point, and why continue? And so we parted ways there,
I think Jeff just grew weary of the whole gun club tag, and again, the gun club, with the exception of East Coast and some European countries, is a very obscure band. And to do all this trailblazing and to have very little in return for it, it must have been very frustrating. And to have not only one lineup, but two lineups, three, to completely dissolve in front of your eyes must have been very frustrating. And to have to deal with all these different personalities, it's like this little family. And to have three families leave you, I'm sure he must have just been really tired and It must have been really dreary. So he decided to do his own thing with Wild Weed.
Actually, Jeffrey asked me to play on that record, but I thought, I think you should make a record that doesn't have me on it, So we all landed in London and I kind of did things, and that's when he met up with Nick Sanderson and Rami Mori in his band, the Jeffrey Lee Quartet, the live band for the record. And Rami had become his girlfriend, and they started living together and being a couple.
I do remember him being hooked up with Rami, and that being sort of pleasant, and he seemed very solid with that relationship.
They finally had a home, and her roommates and her friends and his friends.
I visited Jeff in London, and I was really pleasantly surprised to see how relaxed he was. He really had picked a life, a woman that was making him happy.
So, one day, I was talking to Jeffrey, and he suggested that we make a gun club again with Rami and Nick. I think he was not really into doing the solo thing, and maybe the popularity wasn't as much, and he just thought it was maybe time to ask. I think with him and Rami, they decided it'd be a good idea. And so I suggested that the band, instead of being in London, get out of London and record in Berlin.
Mother Juno is just such a great record. To go from something that was genre breaking but pretty straightforward to some surreal masterpiece, like the Breaking Hands and Hearts. The chord progressions might be simple, but there's just these nuances on this record.
A lot of those songs for Mother Juno album were very influenced by our childhood in LA. There's like Lupita Screams, just using Mexican imagery and sound, kind of a hard rock sound, kind of Yellow Eyes, definitely. Jeffrey said he just had an idea that this was a kind of a song that you would hear coming out of a garage in El Monte,
Around 86, 87, when his band put out the Mother Juno album, I was touring a lot in Europe with the Rollins band, and we would play together on festival dates and stuff, and Jeffrey was combating, his chemical abuses, and he got clean. Right around the time of Mother Juno, he got all lean, and the album was good. The tour's going great. He's doing really well.
That band it shocked people, especially the British press, who really had gotten down on Jeffrey, because you can be their favorite, and then when you go out of favor with them, you're really out of favor. And they would say a few journalists would say some pretty insulting things, and personally insulting things. And, and that really made people, that band and those shows really made people go oh my God, not only is he, not Fat Jeffrey anymore, he's stronger than ever. And there was a real fierceness to the band in those days. And Jeffrey really, although in not great health, he was super strong on stage, and the band was super strong, and that music was super tough music. And so the first couple tours, definitely for that album, were really great, on stage. And it was just a bit later when things went back to not so good. Jeffrey's, abuse of alcohol and drugs and his actually failing health started to get the better of him, and obviously reflected in the shows, and maybe that's was part of the beginning of the end for me, because I think maybe my heart had gone out of wanting to do the gun club in general. The shows were starting to get really more patchy, and things kept just going on, and we made that Pastoral Hide and Seek record, the Divinity record.
Yeah, after the Divinity EP, Kid Congo Powers left from that period, and it was kind of a dire time for Jeff.
It was not like a dramatic, like, oh my God, I'm quitting because I can't stand this. It was more like, I think the whole thing was fading into some weird area.
Jeff was coming up with the Lucky Jim material, which was Jeff always had this running thing of somewhat morose records, but this one was especially dire. A House Is Not a Home kind of sums up that time. I know his health was failing at that time, and he was in and out of hospitals, a lot of drug rehabs at that time, and I know his relationship with Rami was fairly rocky.
That was falling apart, and I knew he was upset about it, but I didn't actually hear a lot about it from him.
I think she eventually left with the drummer, which is pretty hard to take if you're the singer and the drummer gets your chick. I mean, that's some Spinal Tap stuff.
He felt really betrayed because it was Nick and Rami that, got together, but I also understood Rami's reason for leaving him. She had taken so much care of him, and she couldn't do it anymore, and he was getting really crazy. But he had physically lost himself, which I think made him lose his mind. I think nothing was processing itself right. And didn't he go back to Japan?
Jeff got really into Japanese culture and Japan in general. He talks about it in his book a lot. He visited Japan all the time.
He would keep himself inspired. I think that was part of the romance with Romy, and part of his romance with Japan and Vietnam, and that Far Eastern thing, because he had that element of adventurer in him, and did promote that mythology, and I thought, it's brave to do that stuff. I didn't go to Vietnam, hitchhiking around or taking trains or whatever he did.
Guys like that, if they go to Southeast Asia, they're not going really, they're not going to look at ancient ruins at Angkor Wat, they're going for drugs. So it was like, oh, great.
Yeah, after that, I guess he came back to LA and was very fucked up. So that's when they made Lucky Jim. So it was, for one, economically not sound, and plus I told Jeffrey already I didn't want to do anymore.
His health was failing pretty bad, but you got to hand it to Jeff Pierce. This guy was doing very poor, and health-wise and mentally he was shot, but even his last work was fantastic. And you can hear how sounds like Jeff's really on his last leg, and he truly was.
So we went down to the hospital, Keith Morris and I, in Santa Monica, and we tried to talk Jeffrey into, go into a rehab, and if you get sober, then we can get you a liver or something like that. And he just really wouldn't have any part of it, He was, there was a moment of clarity that he kind of, and then the self-destructive Jeffrey mind took over, and he said, I know more than the doctors do. They've been telling me I'm going to die for years. I've been studying my disease. They don't even know my disease. Well,
I know he was hanging out a lot at Viper Room, and there's lots of stories about this, and he was, and so I didn't actually see him a lot until I think I guess Mike Mart and some people told him, suggested he do a gun club show or two or whatever, and that they'd make a band, and he asked me to play, and I was, and he sounded good enough to me.
It was billed as a gun club, and it was Jeffrey and and I and Kid, and
then we really, blew it out, and it was good, playing the songs. And then we got asked to do this other show. Remember, that was not so good. Jeffrey looked really bad. Like, his face was really swollen, like almost looking like frog eyes, He was so bloated, like from whatever, his illness.
By the time that they did their last show at the Ringling Sisters benefit, I knew he was going to die very soon then. I mean, he looked so horrible.
Jeffrey went to his father's to go dry out for one, and his father was actually really helping him with that and being really cool about that. And he was writing the book, the Go Tell the Mountain, for Henry.
We worked on like a lyric section, a prose section, because he had all this stuff going on, and he's showing us all this new stuff he'd been writing.
He was reading me from the book. He was reading me like all the stuff about Isaac Hayes and talking to rappers or spies on the Tokyo Tower and all this crazy stuff. And we were like really laughing like so much about it. He thought it was hysterically funny.
And we would spread all the lyrics all over the floor, little bits of writing on half pieces of paper. And this place would look like, all this stuff had been washed up on the floor, And we would piece the book together little by little. And then Jeffrey died.
No matter how much you're ready for it, you're never ready for it. And it was just really, it was like so devastating,
He probably didn't, like a lot of people, didn't allow himself to appreciate what he had accomplished. And that's a sad thing in the artist mentality in general, and it definitely applies to Jeffrey. Where, nothing became popular with quotes around it, so therefore I'm shit. But it actually starts with I'm shit. So therefore, no matter what happens to it, I'm still shit, That's a bad place, and we're all guilty of that.
He had to be so aggressive to make his thing work that in a lot of in the town that it caused him a lot of grief, and I think it hurt him,
It's more mysterious and interesting now that he's gone. Put it this way, this is kind of a weird thing to say, but guys like him, music like that is usually done by people who are dead.
People that do stuff like Jeffrey, they're talented despite the shit they do to kill themselves, They're not talented because of it. They're talented despite it. He had a huge talent. He might have thought he was stealing all this stuff. I'll tell you, man, he was doing a lot of things that were completely original in ways that like other people, wish they could have been doing them.
Not many people can say that they invented something. Very few.
Now that he's gone, he is totally legendary now. He is lore at this point. Just because of all the imagery of the songs, the great romantic aspect of his playing and that voice. What a lonely, beautiful sound his voice was. It was like, something calling from a bayou somewhere. Really something else.
Jeff is definitely a touchstone for a lot of creative people. I miss the guy incredibly.
I'm conflicted because, I hit this guy in the face with a golf club so many times in my mind. At the same time, if I didn't know him, I wouldn't be the cool guy that I am now.
I saw Jeff in a nightclub. I was just visiting Los Angeles, and I see him there. And I had been told, he looks bad. He's gained a lot of weight. He's lost a lot of weight. He's just, on his last leg. And I'm looking at him before he noticed me, and I'm thinking, God, he looks good. He looks like he always has. I mean, he really didn't look any worse for wear. And so I just walked up to him, and I just stuck my hand out, and I said, "How you doing, Jeff?" And he stuck his hand out, and we shook hands, and it was just like, I don't know, all that rancor, all that animosity just disappeared in 1 second. Like it never existed. And I just thought, it just seemed like a Hollywood thing to me. And then what does he do? He reaches into his wallet, pulls out a business card, and it just says, show business. And it's got his phone number on it. And I thought, perfect. Perfect.
Listen, what is it? What's going on with you, Terry? You're writing a book. You wrote a book.
Yeah, I'm actually just kind of putting the finishing touches on it. It really is, as corny as it sounds, a celebration of everything that we did at that time, and it'll be happy. It'll be sad.
There's nothing corny about it, and you've already sold a copy, two. One for me, one for Chuck.
Oh, great.
For
Oh,
sure.
good. I thought I'd have to give you a free one.
No, no, absolutely not. And yeah, Ward, how about you? What are you doing?
I just I have a band called the Liquor Giants that plays occasionally, but not really pursuing the lucrative and glamorous rock and roll lifestyle these days.
Ward and Terry, it seems a shame because you've made some of the greatest punk rock and roll the world has ever heard. And I want to thank you for coming to the Mighty Morning Show. This is Indy 1031. My name's Dickie Barrett. Thanks, fellas.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you.
I had no idea.
How about the self-destruction that's so often associated with rock and that whole case in point?
Not self-destroyed. 58 Christmas Eve, still going strong.
And what about those who don't make it? What do you?
Too bad.